This is SoundStage founder Doug Schneider. You're listening to the SoundStage Audiophile Podcast, your semi-regular deep dive into news, facts, opinions, and anecdotes about everything that really matters in the world of high-performance audio. Hosts Brent Butterworth and Dennis Berger have more than 5 decades worth of audio product testing experience and a few hours of podcasting experience as well. Now, here's Brent and Dennis.
Hi, I'm Brent Butterworth, editor of SoundStage Solo.
And I am Dennis Berger, editor of SoundStage Access.
And we are here today to bring you the SoundStage Audiophile Podcast, a semi-weekly, or is it bi-weekly? One of the two. Every other week, twice a month or something, discourse on what's going on in the world of audio. Everything you need to know, or at least everything we find entertaining enough to share with you.
There you go.
About audio. We are part of the SoundStage network, which is, go to soundstage.com and check it out. It is 9 microsites and some YouTube videos and one awesome podcast that are all dealing with different aspects of audio. So go check it out, soundstage.com. So, Dennis, we are going to start our discussion today with a difference of opinion. And on the one end, we have an article from the Absolute Sound, revered audio publication going back 40 or 50 years, about a new headphone listening station that costs $29,000. On the other hand, we have a YouTube video from a guy named Crinacle, who's famous as like a guy who measures earphones and actually does some voicing on them for different manufacturers. And he contends that an Apple dongle, the little thing that you plug into the lightning connector of your iPod or your iPhone or whatever, is perfectly fine. It's all the headphone amp you need. So we are going to dig into that controversy a little bit. And what do you have for us?
I want to bring our founder, Doug Schneider, in for the second segment. You and I have talked a lot about what measurements mean in terms of, capturing sort of what people like and dislike in terms of audio and what it means to the end user and what it means to us as reviewers. But I want to get Doug's perspective on what measurements mean to him as a publisher, because there are not a lot of online publications in the world of audio that are doing measurements, and certainly fewer still that are doing measurements to the degree that we're doing at SoundStage, and even fewer still who are mixing those objective measurements with the subjective listening impressions. So I just want to get his take on it, why he started doing it and what they mean to him. And cool. What are we wrapping up with this week?
We're going to wrap up with something you turned me on to, and that is a YouTube video by PS Audio founder Paul McGowan, where he talks about different speakers being either resolving or not resolving. And you and I think you were quite surprised to find that he considers some pretty revered and respected brands to be not resolving, and some other brands that don't seem especially any better or worse than those, to be resolving.
Yeah.
So we're gonna dig into. We're gonna try to figure out what resolving means. We are going to combine forces here and try to figure out what he's talking about.
Yeah, before we get there, though, let's dig into this Absolute Sound thing, because, look, we've been friends for many years, and we have a very old tradition of sending articles to each other back and forth and just going WTF. And I think this article that you sent me from the Absolute Sound, look, I'm not picking on the Absolute Sound, but when you sent me the article about this DCS headphone listening station for nearly $30,000, that was a big WTF for me.
We should say right at the top, we just picked. We just chose the Absolute Sound here because they happen to run an article on it, so that you can actually go to theabsolutesound.com. That's THE absolutesound.com and find this. So it's just, it could have been any publication. There's no criticism of Absolute Sound here.
No, they just republished the press release.
So they talk about this new DCS headphone listening system, and it's like $29,150, I think was the price. US. And so it combines it's 3 boxes. The DAC is built into the streamer. So it's a streamer. So the streamer pulls off your content from the web. And then the second box is a master clock, that provides a nice stable time source for the streamer / DAC. And then there's the headphone amp. And you can buy them all separately, but they kind of all stack nicely atop one another, and they're all kind of, clearly they work as a system. The designs all match, and it actually looks really cool. But it's not $30,000 cool looking. Like, let's say a product from Dan D'Agostino Master Audio Systems is $30,000 or $40,000, and a lot of
B&O stuff, Bang & Olufsen. Like, you look at that and go, yeah, I could see $30,000.
Yeah, it's like you look at that and you go like, well, that's really cool looking, and people would walk into your place and go like, what is that thing? And if you want to spend $10 or $20 or $30 or $40, $50,000 to have a thing where people walk into your house and say, what is that thing? Well, I have a Shih Tzu, right? And people walk into my house and see my Shih Tzu and go like, they don't go, what is that thing? They go like, oh my gosh, it's a cute dog. And, I would say, probably this damn dog has probably cost me about $30,000 total. When you figure the medical care, all the crap I buy for her, the extra, the colossal amount of extra money I have to pay in hotel bills right now. So clearly the focus here is on quality. So you're getting a streamer that is ostensibly better than whatever other streamer you would buy, be it a Sonos thing or a Blue Sound thing, or lots of audio brands have streamers. You're getting a headphone amp, which is ostensibly better than the other headphone amps that you would buy. I mean, there's a lot of top-notch headphone amps out there for $500 or $1,000. And you're getting this clock. And of course, every DAC has a clock of some sort, right? Otherwise, they couldn't function. They have to know like when when to read the next sample. So on the other hand, you have this guy named Crinacle, and this is Crinacle. And you should check out his channel on YouTube. So he started out as a guy who actually got I think it's a Gross, coupler that you can use to measure earphones. So he does, legitimate, really good measurements. And he was kind of famous for measuring like every set of earphones on the market. So he also got involved in tuning, and manufacturers would hire him to do tuning. And so he also started this, and in fact, on SoundStage, I reviewed the KZX Crinacle CRN earphones, which you can find on soundstagesolo.com. And pretty good stuff. And they were like $40 or something. So he started a YouTube channel. His YouTube channel is great. He's got a lot of personality. He really knows what he's talking about. And he came out with one that really shocked me, though, because he came out with one where the splash image on it is basically a close-up of the Apple dongle. I think they cost $30 or something. And it's got a lightning connector on one end and a 3.5 millimeter headphone jack on the other. And you plug that in to your iPhone, which, of course, no iPhones have headphone jacks anymore. And it gives you a headphone jack and you can plug in. And so he's basically saying this $30 thing is fine. And you don't need, except in the relatively rare cases where you have headphones that really need a powerful amp, like let's say certain hi-fi man models. You don't need an amp any better than this. He says certainly for earphones, you don't need an amp any better than this because they're all sensitive enough to play off of this thing at very loud levels. And he goes further into it and he says, look, I listen to all these digital to audio. Let me try this again. Digital to audio. Man, can you help me out?
Digital to analog converters.
Thank you so much. So you listen to all these digital to analog converters, and he said, they all kind of sound pretty much the same to me. And, they do to me too. So just saying so. So, and, amplifiers don't sound all that different. And, use, as he points out in the thing, if your amplifier is used within the limits of its power, if you're not asking it to put out more power than it can, they're all going to work fine. And I gotta say, I think I might be the only person who's actually published blind listening tests on these headphone amp DACs. There's a lot of these products. I mean, yeah, the Apple dongle's a really cheap one. You can get a similarly cheap one from, say, Anker Soundcore and a couple other brands, $30, $40, something like that. FiO, I think, makes one for that price. And then you can step up to about $100 or $200 for the products like the Audio Quest Dragonfly and the Earfun Eagle and things like that. And then you can step up to $300 or $400. And I've actually done a couple of rounds of blind testing where we got multiple computers. You got lined up 4 laptops, all of them running FooBar 2000, which is a free, high-res audio player, and matching the levels as best I could, because it's the level steps that you get in something like FooBar are not 0.1 dB. It's like 0.3 dB or something like that.
Right.
But still, you can get pretty close to a decent level match on it. And I have a switcher. I have like kind of a modular switcher system I made where you can plug in different things and do blind testing with a lot of different kinds of products. And so we've had people come in, blind test, and the one person operates the, gets all 4 DACs going with the same exact file on all of them, either high res or maybe an MP3 or who knows what. And you play them all and they're at match levels, and the person just has, 1, 2, 3, 4 on the switch. And so you can't, as the test administrator, you can't tell what they're listening to. And they just know 1, 2, 3, and 4. And you do that, and they sound a little different, but they don't sound consistently better or worse. And, I would argue, if someone wants to argue this, and I'm sure there's a lot of high-end audio writers and a lot of audiophiles that would like to argue this point, but none of those people have ever done this test. I guarantee you, because if they did this test, they'd be like, oh, wow.
Yeah. And that's the thing. We've talked about this before on the podcast, but I just wish we could have more honest conversations about how much difference there is, and more importantly, how meaningful the difference is. We're always talking about ABX testing, and I know a while back when there was a big push for sort of a big attack against Spotify for not having a truly lossless thing. There was somebody set up an ABX test where, okay, can you tell the difference between truly lossless and sort of Ogvorbis at the bit rates that Spotify is doing? I took that test. I can identify the Ogvorbis about 80% of the time, I think was my number. I can tell. But what that doesn't tell you is, does it really matter? Okay, I can tell, but how much of a difference, how much meaningful difference is it really? And do I care? And the thing is, the Ogvorbis sounds so great that it's like, okay, am I going to get fussy about what might be I think before we've used terminology like 0.5% difference, especially if you consider the fact that when I'm using Spotify as opposed to Qobuz, I'm probably in the car where, man, I guarantee you any different. I could probably be listening to 64 kilobit per second MP3 and it would sound fine.
Yeah.
But it's again, I think I'm not saying I have the answer. I'm just saying we need to find a way to better quantify how much difference are we actually talking about, and how much should you care about that difference? Because sometimes little differences are substantial. Sometimes little differences aren't. And I just wish we could have a more open and honest conversation about that. And look, I'm looking at this DCS stuff that you're putting in front of me here, and yeah, you're right in terms of aesthetics. Well, you're not going to sell me on that. But how much difference could you really have between this and, look, what I'm using largely for my headphone setup right now is this HEL desktop DAC and headphone amp. That's like, I don't know, 200 something bucks.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing. How much difference am I really going to hear between that setup and this $29,000 DCS setup? I will say, there's like the Hi-Fi Man Susvara, which is easily one of the best headphones you can buy. It's $6,000. It's very difficult to drive. I think Hi-Fi Man just came out with an amp that actually really will drive the thing. Okay, yeah, if you've got an extreme headphone like that, you probably need more power. And certainly, there's a lot of audiophile headphones that an Apple dongle
is not going to be quite adequate to drive, right? It'll get you up to a listenable level, but if you want to play a little bit louder, which, you should always be careful about that, but once in a while, maybe you want to crank it up a little bit. The Apple dongle's not going to do it, and that will be on a lot of Hi-Fi Man models and on even some of the audiophile Sennheiser models and things like that. So fine, but you know what? You can go get the Earman Eagle for $100, and it still won't drive that the really big fancy Hi-Fi Mans, but you're gonna you're gonna need to spend $1,000 to get an amp that'll do that, or hook them directly to a speaker amp. You can also do that too.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm just really glad that Crinacle came out and did this and said this in a way that was really, frankly, more extreme and gutsy than I would have done. Even though he's right,
And it really digestible. And one of the things that I loved that he did was he acknowledged every sort of corner case where, okay, maybe this isn't enough for you, right? Yeah. It's sort of, here's your rare situation where perhaps not, right? But for most people, it's fine.
Yeah, and now granted, one thing I don't think he acknowledged is, sometimes you do just want to buy something a little fancier, and that's fine too. Whatever turns you on, If
you and I have talked before about like the Corvette that my dad and I have. Like I'm super thinking about installing a new air intake that would give me 5 extra horsepower. Am I going to feel 5 extra horsepower on the track once I'm able to drive again? No, I am not. But who cares? I kind of want it because it's cool and I'm into Corvettes, right?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
that's fine.
So,
I buy musical instrument stuff that, that I don't, I have I don't know how much my main ukulele I play is like more than $1,000. I really love it, but I don't need that. So I think let's wrap this up, and we're going to move on to we're going to invite SoundStage founder Doug Schneider to weigh in on the subject of audio measurements.
Yeah, that's going to be fun.
Okay, see you guys in a minute.
And welcome back to the SoundStage Audiophile Podcast. I'm Dennis Berger.
I'm Brent Butterworth.
And I'm Doug Schneider.
Hey, Doug.
Where'd you come from?
Who are you?
Well, the founder of SoundStage. Goes back to 1995, and I'm still here.
Yeah. We're happy to have you here today. I wanted to bring you on because Brent and I have been talking a lot about, measurements, what they mean, what they don't mean, how we sort of convey them to the readers and things. But I wanted to bring you in and talk to you about what they mean to you as a publisher, how you started integrating measurements into the coverage at SoundStage, and things like that. So I guess maybe that'd be a good place to start. Like, when did you decide to start doing measurements at SoundStage and why?
Well, like I said, SoundStage started in 1995, and it was actually in 1999. I live in the same city as Canada's National Research Council, NRC, that I went over to NRC to interview Paul Barton, PSB speakers. And when I was interviewing Paul Barton, he was talking a lot about speakers and measurements and design ideas. And then he says, why don't you measure speakers for your publication? And I've always had a lot of respect for measurements. And I said, yeah, but how would I do that? And he said, I'll introduce you to the guys here. And he introduced me to Renee, who was the technical person there at the time. And long story short, a week later, we had a contract with NRC to start doing measurements there. And from the year 2000, we started publishing measurements and continue to do so.
So that was speakers. How did you get into electronics from there? Because, just about everything I review, you measure.
The interesting thing about the measurements of electronics is the success of the speaker measurements. Now, we didn't know it would be a success. In fact, when we announced that we were doing measurements at NRC, one of the Canadian speaker designers at the time wrote me right away and he said, "Congratulations, this is amazing. And you're going to be out of business in 6 months." And I'm like, "What?" And he says, you start measuring these company speakers, they're not going to send you anything. These guys don't want their speakers measured. I'm like, "Are you sure?" So I was a little hesitant, but we went ahead with it, and the opposite came true. In fact, there were a few companies who did not want their speakers measured. They were like, "No way, we're not sending you speakers now." But many companies did want their speakers measured, and I'll tell you why. NRC has a sterling reputation, always has, and we were coming in the first publication, I think in the world, to use a real anechoic chamber, certainly in North America. At that time, others were measuring them outside in their driveway, in their backyard, in the room. Here we had a world-class facility to measure speakers. And really good companies that make really good speakers sent their speakers to us very willingly. So while we did have a few companies, "Hey, we're not going to deal with you," mostly it was a boon for us. So once that was going well, we moved into electronics measurements. And that was a little more difficult because NRC doesn't do that. I didn't know anybody locally. But we hired Bascom King down in California in about 2003 to do our measurement program. And he did for, up to about 4 years ago. And he recently passed away. But he was handling amplifier measurements mainly, but we'd occasionally do preamplifiers. We never measured DACs with him, though. We stuck to amplifiers and preamplifiers.
One of the things you talked about is sort of the expected backlash from manufacturers, speaker manufacturers in particular, but was there ever any backlash from readers? Because, let's face it, there are some people in our hobby who are sort of hostile to the notion that measurements really mean anything for the reader, I
always go with my gut feel. And when you said that, the first thing that jumped to mind was the Talon loudspeakers, which were big in the early 2000s. And if you ask me, they were crap, just utter junk. I mean, you just had to listen to these speakers to know they had no highs, they had no lows, and they weren't a Bose. They were awful. They were awful. And they had these wild, wacky design ideas. And we did get this backlash from people because, "No, this can't be right. People say great things about these speakers, blah, blah, blah." Well, the measurements, and this is the theme of the measurements, are what they are. And actually, the measurements show how that speaker in particular sounded. So there was some backlash. And occasionally, we did get some backlash from people who thought, "Oh, I thought my speaker would measure a lot more neutrally, this, that." But in fact, over time, people have gone to trust our measurements, actually.
The difficulty I find, there's been this sort of virus instilled in the audiophile community where there's a lot of writers, almost none of whom have ever actually done a measurement. No, let me amend that. None of whom have ever actually done a measurement who insist that measurements are meaningless and who've never read any of the research on this. And I find that as a measurement guy myself, I'm just always kind of fighting against that there's this idea in the, not just audiophiles, even some of the general public now, that the measurements are meaningless. And so how do you address that when people bring that up to you?
Certain people, they're going to come in with, maybe they have that bias and they want to have that bias. You're never going to convince somebody who's just wants to be convinced that they're meaningless. They just taken the stand in this. It's going to take a lot to convince them. But many people who have taken that stand just need a little bit of education sometimes, a little bit of, okay, hang on, you think that, but why do you think that? So you try to understand, why do you think measurements are useless? And if it is because they don't understand them, or they see something in there that they don't like, but they do like what they hear, maybe you try to explain that. And a lot of times, I think it's more just an understanding. That said, you are going to get these people who say, "Oh, measurements are useless. There's no value to them whatsoever." And like I said, you're never going to change those minds. But education, it goes a long way. It's not immediate, but over time, reasonable people come through.
How do we know that these measurements, relate to what we hear?
Well, there's been a lot of research on it. Obviously, Floyd Toole, National Research Council, Harman carries on. Other companies as well continued on with research. Paradigm, I was just talking to them about the research since some of their guys who were at National Research Council moved on to their own research center. So there is a lot of correlation between what sounds good and what doesn't. And there's a lot of understanding what to look at in the measurements that say, okay, maybe this thing doesn't measure to those ideals, but it actually might be mirroring what you hear. I think actually the danger right now is what's happening, particularly on one forum where the measurements themselves are getting taken too far. They're looking at the measurements, they're deciding what something sounds like based on basically reading Floyd Toole's book, and then going and listening to it. And I think that's actually more dangerous. In fact, I had a discussion in Munich recently with Peter Como, who heads the speaker design for the IAG group. So he's behind the Wharfdale speakers, the Mission speakers, and he's a measurements guy. Everything's done on the measurements, but he's like, you really got to listen to these things because even small changes in loudspeakers, in the response, in the crossover point selected, can have huge audible impacts, or at least significant, maybe not enormous, or guess what you define as enormous. But you really have to listen. So I think there's also the danger of people who have taken measurements too far. And, I talked to Floyd Toole about this a couple months ago, and he said it all starts and ends with listening. And when you put measurements at the beginning and the end, that's a problem. And I've seen that with your headphone measurements. Sometimes you see something and go, wow, that doesn't kind of look like the ideal, but you like the sound of it. And so you got to kind of look at the measurements and understand why.
Yeah. I think that, I think it's really important to note that, just doing measurements is never enough. You have to listen. And ideally, you do what they do at the NRC and at Harman, where you have, panels of people listening in blind tests, because that's sort of the gold standard, which of course, audio publications usually can't really afford to do all that often.
Or don't like to do them.
Or don't like to do them. Yeah. But yeah. I think this is one thing. So how do you feel about the people? There's a lot of guys on the internet now who basically just measure, and they put like a paragraph of listening notes, if even that.
Yeah, that to me is really, really dangerous. If you do look back at all that NRC research, and I've been talking a lot about it in the last couple months with Paul Barton and that for the PSB documentary and whatnot, it was all revolving around listening and then doing measurements. And the measurements were done independently. So, and when you look at what's called the Green Book that came out of NRC, the listening correlated big time with the measurements. But if you just go to the measurements first, that's a big danger. It's a huge problem. And like I said, there's a forum pretty much dedicated to doing just that. There are people who just look at the measurements, they do like or they don't like what they see, and they just based on that. And I would say, too, this is something Paul Barton reinforced to me a long time ago. Sometimes speaker measurements, the way something sounds and the way something looks isn't quite the same when it comes in speaker measurements. You have to have a real kind of knowledge, almost a forensic analysis of what to look for in a speaker measurement. And that's sometimes when people say to me, well, that speaker doesn't measure well. And I say, well, what does measure well mean? Flat frequency response on axis isn't the only thing. A tilted up frequency response on axis, if it's flat, can be a real problem. It could be ultra flat, but if you see the wrong kind of tilt in the balance, you see poor off axis dispersion, you see distortion coming up as a result of well, I'll give you an example. There was an extremely expensive loudspeaker, and I won't name the name because they changed them up a lot, but they got ultra flat frequency, ultra flat, on and off axis. But when we measured that, we got that, and the distortion was at about 10%. And I remember one speaker designer saying, commenting off to the side, that's really hard to get those distortion figures out of those drivers. You got to really work to do something that poorly. And later on, the designer told me, I thought flat frequency response was all that mattered.
Yeah.
So he muscled his way into a flat frequency response. So when it comes to these speaker measurements, I was talking to Dominic at Sim Audio about this, and they released their first speaker. Sim Audio has done electronics, really stellar electronics, and he's like, you make a tiny difference a tiny change in electronics, and you get a tiny change. You make a big change in electronics, and sometimes it's not that big, but you make a small change in speakers, it's huge.
Yeah.
It's huge.
Doug, I think you'll remember when I first came on board SoundStage, late 2020. One of the first things I told you was, I was super excited to be involved with a publication that was doing measurements, because to me, it is, everybody learns differently. And a lot of times, Brent and I joke that I learn by messing up, right? And so for me, one of the things that has been most fun about writing for SoundStage is I get to throw these predictions out that are either going to be supported or contradicted by the measurements. And if they're supported, I've learned something. And if they're contradicted, I've learned something. I mean, just to give you an example, I, over the past year or so, reviewed 2 different integrated amps by the same manufacturer and noticed, different things about the performance, especially in terms of like bass authority. And what I said in my, review was, I think when Diego gets his hands on these, I think you'll find that this one is probably stable down to 2 ohms and this one isn't. Well, that's the measurements bore that out, right? But for me, it's not about bragging rights. It's about finding those limits of what do the measurements mean in terms of what I'm hearing, and that helps me when people write in emails and say, "Hey, I've got these speakers. What amp should I? I've got $500 to spend on an amp. What should I get? Or I've got this amp. What speaker should I put with it?" And we're always getting these questions, and largely the answer is I don't know, unless I've heard that exact combination. But being able to learn more directly about what the measurements correlate to in terms of hearing has been a big help for me. But one thing I wanted to ask you is, what do you do as a publisher when they don't match up, when the reviewer says one thing and the measurements say another?
Well, let me give you a couple examples. First of all, it is possible to screw up measurements. So when they don't match up, you got to make sure you did your measurements correctly. It's easy to change what a speaker looks like by varying the microphone height. That's why we try to specify that. It's easy to mess up, and Diego's, he's not messing up right now, I hope, but he's in the lab measuring an amplifier. It's easy to get erroneous results if you have bad connections or you run the test poorly or something. So when they don't match up, or they appear not to match up, and everything has been done correctly, the measurements are what they are. And sometimes what doesn't appear to match up sometimes comes through in the measurements. You can say, well, hang on, at first it doesn't seem to match up, but hang on, let's look at this. Let's look at that. When you start, particularly with speaker designs, you go, well, maybe they're hearing this in the treble. Maybe they're hearing that. And you start analyzing the measurements and maybe what they're hearing or not hearing. And let's face it, too, there's another thing, too, and that is that reviewers screw up. Reviewers imagine differences. Reviewers think they hear differences that aren't there. Sometimes they pick out differences, sometimes they're not. And maybe some of those imaginary differences won't show up in the measurements because they're not there. And then one thing we haven't talked about is electronics, and people keep harping on this these days. And I think it's not a useless spec, but signal to noise ratio.
Mm-hmm.
Higher the better, right? Oh, look at this. This has got 110 dB signal to noise ratio. In other words, that's the amount of signal to the amount of noise. Well, do you guys know what is the audibility? Where does it become irrelevant?
Probably 70 decibels or something.
Right. So you got these guys on the measurement forums. Oh, this one's got 105 dB signal to noise ratio. Crap. This one's got 112. Well, you're not hearing that. And if you are, that's an imaginary difference, okay? Mm-hmm. Let's face it. And, in fact, I was talking to the head of design at Name, and they stopped looking, not completely at signal to noise ratio, but beyond a certain threshold, they said it just doesn't matter. And we make sure other parts of the design are correct, not just chasing this one spec. And that's a danger, too. So this idea of when they don't match up, well, what we ultimately do is just publish both and let people decide. Here's what the reviewer said. Here's what, and this is when Diego came on, he said, what if a product measures really poorly? And I'm like, providing we've done the measurements correctly, we publish it. It is what it is.
Yeah.
And those are the ones that I like to publish.
Yeah. Well,
because, If everything measured great, it would seem kind of a little boring to publish measurements. But it's almost like watching a car race. You're kind of everybody likes to have a nice fast car race, but we kind of enjoy the crack ups too, right?
Well, I'll tell you something too. I would say at least 15 speaker designs have been changed for the better as a result of our measurements. And I'll tell you the one parameter. People are measuring distortion now, but back in the 2000s, 2010, stereophile can't measure distortion. I haven't seen, one of the European, the German magazines measure distortion. I've never seen the British magazines, but we were measuring distortion, and they were doing that at NRC for decades, so they have that in place. And the distortion will come up, and the loudspeaker designer never knew it was there because they were unable to measure it. And then an iteration later, that distortion problem is gone in the new version of the speaker. So it's affected. So sometimes those measurements that show some problem is fixed the next time because they didn't know it was there.
Yeah.
Cool.
That's awesome.
That's great.
So all in all, I think the key with the measurements is you got to do them correctly. And that's why, we got the Audio Precision 555. We use NRC's facility. We can trust it. If something goes wrong, we can diagnose it. And they are what they are, and for better or worse. And I think the thing is, though, you don't want to read too much of it. And your headphone measurements as well. They're consistent. They're reliable. I'll assume, Brent, that sometimes things goes wrong. No, I assume sometimes things go wrong, right? And you kind of go, well, what's going on? But what you ultimately send us, right? You feel is correct.
One other thing I wanted to ask you about, Doug, is, and I'm giving people a little bit of a peek behind the curtain here, but just to sort of walk people through a process of, okay, I review an integrated amp. I turn my copy in. It might be going live, a month later or what have you. It's all laid out. The photos are in it. You send me the copy. We make any tweaks to the review, but there are no measurements to be seen. Like, those measurements don't go live generally until the day before the review is published. Like, I'm sort of waiting for the review to go live so I can go in and look at the measurements and go, oh, did I get it right? Did I get it wrong? Did I make any mistakes? Did I learn anything? How did that develop? Was that always been your philosophy, or was there something that made you realize, oh, I got to hide these measurements until it's too late?
Not till too late. Okay, so why they're to the end, and I'll have you seen Diego's electronics measurements he does for us? When I told him to go all out, and I'm putting together, I have to put together the very end of it, right? He supplies the whole thing. And literally there's a mini DSP integrated amp with die rack. And he's got 50 graphs. This takes forever to put together, right? So sometimes, and you're like, you put this off until the very end. And that review's going on the 15th. Roger Cano wrote it. Okay, so that's sometimes why the electronics measurements in particular take so long to get online. It's like, oh God, we got to now deal with Diego's measurements that are so thorough. And this is going to take hours. So you get a big cup of coffee and you sit up late. But the actual viewing of the measurements, I think, is vital not to. In fact, I'm in charge of the speaker measurements at NRC. There's a technician, Randy, who does the measurements. But if I take a speaker down there and I haven't listened to it, and Randy's and I say, Randy, I'm leaving the room. Don't tell me about the measurements. Get it all done. If there's any anomaly, flag me. I know how they can bias the listening. I know how they can bias your impressions. So let's do it right. Like Floyd said, it begins and ends with listening. Listen first, measure. And Brent, you probably have to do the same thing with the headphone reviews, right? So how I came to that is I know the bias that knowing the measurements, particularly speaker measurements, can impart.
It's a little different with me because I'm not a product. I measure 36 headphones a year, at least for SoundStage, and actually then do some more for my columns and stuff. And then I run a bunch of other measurements for other publications. So I've got a lot churning, and I can't always measure. I measure headphones in a batch usually. And so sometimes I do the measurements before, sometimes after. However, I've been, headphone measurements, we have a general idea of what to look for. And I can look at a headphone measurement and go, well, that's really wacky, or it's not. But if a lot of them are kind of within the same general sort of shape of frequency response, but little differences of a decibel or two in the bass or the treble can make a huge difference in the sound. And so if I see a really wacky headphone measurement, it is very unlikely that that's going to sound good. It might, but it probably won't. But then if I see, reasonable headphone measurements, I don't draw any conclusions, because you have to like kind of compare it to a bunch of stuff and kind of dig into it. And it's just really, 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 really unwise to judge a headphone purely by the measurements, when these little tiny differences of a decibel or so can make the difference between liking and not liking a set of headphones. Once you've done this for long enough, a lot of your bias tends to start to go away, because you've found products from every brand that suck, and from every brand that are maybe not every brand, but from a lot of brands that are great, right? And so you start to realize any bias you might have that say, oh, Sony's great. Well, no, there's Sony headphones that are amazing and Sony headphones that just suck. And it's kind of, and name any other headphone brand, and it's pretty much going to be like that. So as your expertise grows, your certainty decreases.
Yeah.
It's the people who don't know anything who are really sure of themselves.
Isn't that the truth? When I started measuring speakers, the first 6 months, a year, I didn't know anything, and I knew it. But then you start, wow, now I know a lot. You start reading this, and in the first 5 years, you think you know everything.
Yeah.
And then after about 10 years, you realize, no. And now I'm far more uncertain. By the way, what you said too, I fully believe on the measurements. I think it was Scott Bagby at Paradigm said it to me. Blind listening makes you a better sighted listener. And that is because, Paradigm likes to do blind listening tests, and I've done them there. NRC, I've done them at NRC, other companies, PSB, whatnot. And when you see the results of a blind listening test and go, oh my God, I had no idea listening to this. It makes you realize how susceptible you are for bias. So when you go into sighted listening, that stays in your mind.
Yeah, blind listening, going through blind listening tests makes you humble. If you don't go through blind listening tests, you will never understand what you don't know, and you will never understand the limitations of your ears. And so I think, writers who refuse to do blind listening tests are just sort of like, they might as well get a tattoo on their forehead that says, I don't know what I'm talking about.
Well, yeah. And the worst still are the people who brag about their blind listening abilities, and their braggadociousness makes you realize that they're not. I saw a comment on one of Danny Ritchie's videos where a guy said, oh, if you came in and changed my cables, I would know, because I can hear the difference between 5/9 purity copper and 6/9 purity copper in an instant. And I'm like, yeah, that guy's never done a blind test. Never.
Yeah.
Do you want to know another? It was a more informal blind test, but this was about 1990. Okay, before I was doing audio reviewing, my friend Ron set up a blind test at a friend's house. So there were a bunch of us there, and I had just dumped over $3,000 on a Theta Data Basic Transport and a Prime DAC. Remember Theta Digital?
Very well.
Yeah, very well. The revered stuff. And a friend of his also had a Rotel 555 or 565 CD player. I can't remember which one it was, but it doesn't really matter. Rotel was making very good CD players those days, but it was only about $500 or $600. And I had my separates, which were over $3,000, praised in Stereophile and elsewhere as great. And there's little Rotel. And Ron set it up correctly. Blind, he had a lot of technical ability, so it was level matched. And we had 100% correlation. There were about 5 of us there listening as to what we preferred.
Wow.
The Rotel. The Rotel.
Yeah, I remember one of the sort of, life-changing moments for me is Brent and I were in New York one time. This is my first trip to New York, and we went to hang out with Sandy Gross, our friend, who, started Polk and started Definitive and started Golden Ear. Life-changing moment for me is when we walked into Sandy's listening room, and he was using a PlayStation as a CD player. So
right.
This was PS1, and I was like, oh, okay. Okay. I get it. So it sounded amazing.
Yeah. So, at the end of our, when my Theta got stomped, and I still have that stuff, I don't use it. It's in boxes somewhere. My friend Ron said, I hate doing these blind listening tests for people who bought stuff because it always turns out like this.
Mm. Okay, well, we'll take a break and we'll be back on the other side. Doug, thanks for joining us, man.
Thanks, Doug.
Thanks for having me on. Thanks a lot. It was fun.
As they say in Radioland, we're back. I'm Brent Butterworth.
And I am Dennis Berger.
And we are going to wrap up this segment with a discussion that you, Dennis Berger, turned me on to. It's a YouTube video featuring Paul McGowan, who's the founder of PS Audio, a company that's been making amplifiers and various other things for, 30 years at least, a long, long time. And Paul has this new video where he talks about, why don't you take it from here, since you're the one who dug into this?
Yeah, so I spend a lot of time on YouTube, and I always see when PS Audio posts a new video, and this latest that by the time this comes out, it may not be the latest, but as we're recording, it's the latest. It was called, Can Speakers Be Too Resolving? And so for people who don't follow PS Audio, one of the things that Paul does is he will take reader email or listener email, fan email, and read those and sort of respond to them on the YouTube channel. Mm-hmm. I don't know how many of these are genuine, or I don't know if it's like they're making guys. It's like, are these
Penthouse
people
forum letters?
Yeah, is it actual Penthouse? It could be. I don't know. But anyway, there was a new letter that came in, and they're always printed out. Or this guy said, I was listening to Adele's new album on my Onkyo receiver and SVS speakers, and it sounded amazing. And then I put it on my Hi-Fi Man headphones, and they're so much more resolving, and the recording just sounded like garbage. So I'm wondering, can speakers be the same? Can speakers be too resolving? And Paul responded to that. But what's interesting is I was trying to never throughout the course of the conversation could I really get a sense of what he means by resolving. So I started searching the PS Audio YouTube channel, and it turns out he has done a lot of videos about this question of like, what does it mean for a speaker to be resolving? Can it be too resolving? And it's I think the most interesting thing about it for me is I've watched, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 videos from Paul about what resolving means in regard to speakers, and I still don't have a freaking clue. So I want to ask you, Brent Butterworth, what does it mean for a speaker to be resolving?
Well, see, this is where my 30 plus years of experience in audio really pays off. As I understand it, resolving is a combination of inner detail and microdynamics.
Okay, I'm going to need you to find those terms for me.
That's as good an explanation as any. I found it remarkable, the video that you sent me. Paul sort of identified certain speakers as resolving and certain speakers as not resolving. And some of the ones he recommended, he noted as resolving are speakers that are fine, but nothing special. And some of the ones he said are not resolving are speakers that are really well regarded, speakers where the measurements are great, speakers that are listening tested to the nth degree.
Yeah, I've gone through a number of his videos, in addition to the ones that I sent you, and sort of compiled a small list of speakers that he says are resolving and speakers that he says are not resolving.
Can you give us some examples?
I can. So the ELAC debut B5, the original one without there's a new one like B5.2, whatever, that has a front firing port, but he was talking about the original B5. He says is very resolving. He says that Revels are not resolving.
The whole brand, everything from that brand?
I guess, yeah.
Okay.
And he says Bowers and Wilkins can be too resolving. Maggie's apparently are just the perfect amount of resolving. And here's where I got really, really confused. So consistently, dude says Focal speakers are resolving, right?
Okay.
But Sonus Fabers are not. And it's like, I have looked at a bunch of, I took this compiled list that I pulled from 6, 7, 8 videos of his about resolving speakers and sort of like, okay, what's the differences between the ones he says are resolving and are not? Like I'm looking at frequency response. I'm looking at distortion. I'm looking at basically every different variable that you can measure. And to me, there's just no meaningful correlation between how these speakers actually perform and whether or not they qualify as resolving. I mean, this analogy that he gives is like, oh, well, you can think about like driving a car. So a non-resolving speaker just sounds great with everything. It's like riding in a Cadillac, man. It's just like you can't feel the road at all. And a super resolving speaker, that's like driving a Tesla. You could feel every bump in the road. And I'm like, okay, but what does that mean in terms of speaker performance? Like, okay, you've described it in terms of cars, but that does not translate into listening to speakers. What does it actually mean?
So did he find this out through blind listening tests, through measurements, through any kind of rigorous type of research? Are there any AES papers, Audio Engineering Society papers on whether or not speakers are resolving? I mean, is there any other thing that you can point to that like for example, if we want to find out how much distortion matters in a loudspeaker, well, there's people that have done really extensive studies on that, where they did blind testing and they did measurements and they tried a whole bunch of different speakers, and they found some that distort and some that don't, and they compared them in blind tests, and they found out how much distortion measures, and it actually doesn't usually, or how much distortion matters, it usually doesn't matter all that much. But whereas with this, are there any tests, or is there any data out there that can tell us, other than one guy says something's resolving and something's not?
I mean, maybe there is, if I could figure out like what resolving correlates to in terms of actual speaker performance, because that's the thing. It's just sort of this hand wavy language that there's kind of a winking like, well, you just have to trust me thing. I like I said, I watched all of these videos trying to figure out what it means. And the only place that I could find him actually talking about it in terms of audio, not making analogies with chefs preparing food or driving a car or whatever. Like, I don't know there's no correlation there. But the one time he really talked about it in terms of audio, he says this: a resolving speaker can resolve differences between different areas of music. So it's the resolution of differences, the differences in voices, in instruments, in tonalities, in all manner of differences that most other speaker systems don't resolve. And then he goes on to say, like with a resolving speaker, you can hear the differences in the levels of reverb, whereas in a non-resolving speaker, you can't. But I still don't understand like what that actually means. And it always gets back to, at one point he says, some klipsch speakers are very resolving and some klipsch speakers are not. And if you want to know the difference, call and talk to us. Call us and we'll tell you which ones are resolving and which ones aren't. But it's still, to me, it's just a very sort of, it's all very magical and spooky, and it just there's nothing ever nailed down. There's nothing ever said to where you could contradict it. That's the biggest problem for me. If you can't,
except to say there's no evidence.
How do I put this? Because I think Paul is an extremely nice guy, and I think PS Audio is a well-respected. So I don't want to be disparaging.
They make a lot of very good products. I can't think of one of their products that's not good.
Yeah, so I don't want to be seen as disparaging him, but there's a very sort of there's a mystical aspect to all of this that just does not resonate with me. There's a very sort of, I'm thinking about the Beatles going to India and meeting with the Maharishi, whatever, and they eventually realized, this dude ain't on the level. There's an aspect of this that feels like that to me. It's like, trust me, and it's like, okay, I do. until you violated my trust. And with this one, I kind of feel like maybe you're violating my trust. So
anybody can say, "Oh, I hear that." Right. And there's there's a long legacy of audio writers who claim to hear things without any substantiation whatsoever that they're actually hearing those things.
Right. And you can't do like what you can with video and go, okay, well, like point to it,
Yeah, exactly.
That's the frustrating thing.
And so anybody in audio is free to say whatever they want and to make up whatever terms they want, to throw around terms like resolving or inner detail or God knows what, and say, I hear it. Anybody can do that. What very few people can do is substantiate their claims through multiple listener blind testing. If you do that, I buy it. If you say, here's how I define resolving, now we're going to put together blind tests and we'll see if people can identify certain speakers as resolving and certain speakers as not resolving. Now, they will be, if you say resolving means something or another, right? People will identify, one listener will go, oh, this one's resolving and this one's not. The next listener might agree, might not. This is what scientists do as opposed to marketers. Yeah. They say, hey, I have an idea here. I'm going to try to prove it. Or see if I'm right or wrong. I'm going to do all these, unbiased tests with a bunch of listeners and see if they can corroborate what I'm saying. And maybe they can, and maybe they can't. And then say, I'm going to do tests, and say, I'm going to do blind tests. And you know what? Put it out as an AES paper.
I'm going to be more forgiving than you, Brent, because I would be satisfied if they didn't even go that far. And I know Paul McGowan is not listening to us, but if he is, I would just say, you don't even have to do double blind testing to impress me with this, Paul. Just tell me what you mean. Are you saying that it is, a bit of a boost in the presence region? It's like you think maybe a speaker that is 1.5 dB up at between 3 and 5K?
There you go.
Or are you saying it is time alignment between the tweeter and the mid range to make sure the impulses are aligned? It's like just actually tell us what you mean, and that way other people can go off and test this. And Paul's one of these people that thinks, well, there are things that we can hear that we can't measure. I respect him enough to go, okay, well, we agree to disagree, but still speaking clear enough terms that other people can go test it. Or
right, exactly.
Well, I'm gonna sit here and go, you're making crap up. So
wait, I got it. Okay, so see, it's I would define it as, it's like dogs. See, so you have, if I'm correct, an American Staffordshire Terrier. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
So he's a short-coated dog. So you can clearly see the resolution of his body shape there. Now, I have a Shih Tzu, and I'm too cheap to get her cut all that often. So with her, you can't see, the body shape is less resolved.
So she's like an MP3. Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah, so she's like the 64 kilobit per second MP3 equivalent with the dog.
Yeah, and Bruno is DSD times 12 or whatever.
And and here's the thing: sometimes in the audio world, that counts as proof.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it shouldn't.
It absolutely shouldn't. Well, this has been a fun conversation,
Indeed,
Brent. I think it's about time to wrap this up. You want to do some credits?
I would love to do some credits. So we are. Let's credit our founder, Doug Schneider, for being kind enough to join us and entertain us with his anecdotes about speaker measurements and other measurements. And we are part of the SoundStage network of 9 microsites, a very active YouTube channel, and one awesome podcast. And
absolutely.
What else do we have to credit?
Well, we should definitely say I'm doing the engineering and recording this time around. Mm-hmm. You might be doing editing and mastering. I
might be doing editing, mastering, mixing, and stuff. The music will probably be by me, but I think I'll weave a little music from my good friend Terry Landry into this one as well.
Yeah, I think that's enough for this week. So I guess we'll see you guys in 2 weeks.
Okay, bye everybody.
Bye.